Well, good morning. I'm pleased to call this subcommittee meeting on conservation, climate, forestry, and natural resources to order. I'd like to thank Chair Stabenow for being here. She's actually the chair of the big agriculture committee, but we're very glad that she's here.
All powerful.
I know. In fact, if you'd like to just, okay. And I want to thank Ranking Member Marshall for his tremendous partnership and for especially his staff's partnership with mine to prepare for this important hearing, along with our colleagues who are going to join us here today. Our goal is to have an honest conversation about the state of USDA's conservation programs, for better and for worse. To help us, we have several excellent witnesses to share their firsthand experience with these programs and help us identify specific ways to make them work better for America through the upcoming Farm Bill. First, I think it'd be helpful to briefly review why USDA's conservation programs exist in the first place. That matters a lot to my part of the country. We have to go back almost 100 years to the early 1930s. The economy was mired in a depression, and a combination of weak crop prices, high temperatures, and relentless drought created what we now call the Dust Bowl. It was a terrible time for American agriculture. Out of desperation, farmers and ranchers put subpar land into production, and many abandoned responsible practices of land management. And all of it made America's working lands vulnerable to dust storms that ravaged the heartland and stripped over 1 million tons of precious topsoil away. The conditions forced nearly 750,000 family farms and ranches to shutter. And in 1935, Congress recognized the danger and created the Soil Conservation Service, which has since become the National Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. For almost 90 years, NRCS has partnered with farmers, ranchers, and private landowners to strengthen competitiveness, protect the environment, and safeguard our natural resources. Since then, Congress has expanded USDA's conservation mission with new programs, including the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, or ACEP, and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP. Although the specifics of each program vary, they all advance a larger mission to empower America's farmers and ranchers as stewards of our lands and environment. Today, that mission has never been more important as we confront a changing climate and a hotter, drier future. And even as the importance of the USDA programs, conservation programs, has grown, they continue to operate below their potential. They haven't kept pace with a world that looks a lot different in some ways than the Dust Bowl era of the 1930s. And I say that not as a critic of these programs, but as someone who believes in their promise, who fought to give them another $20 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act. That historic investment only raises the stakes for making sure these programs work as well as they can for America's farmers and America's ranchers. But in the 26 listening sessions I've had in Colorado over the last year, and frankly for the last decade, I've heard 5 consistent complaints. First, NRCS programs are too rigid, bureaucratic, and burdened with red tape. To be clear, people blame Congress for this as much as they blame any administration. The applications take too long for people to fill out and too long for USDA to process. In some cases, people have to literally fill out their applications by hand and send them in the mail in the year 2023. In my state, the Colorado Cattlemen's Land Trust received a conservation easement from RCPP 2 years ago, but USDA still hasn't sent them the paperwork to start the easement process. They also face delays with another easement, and they just found out it's because there is only one person at NRCS who reviews easement modifications for the entire country. Second, while this bureaucracy is a pain point for everybody, It's especially hard on young farmers, small-scale producers, and first-generation farmers. They don't have the time or experience, many of them, to navigate the red tape well, and they often can't afford to hire somebody to do it for them. A young farmer from Boulder, Colorado, told me that she spent over 80 hours applying for EQIP only to receive $1,700 for her 10-acre farm. If it takes 80 hours for the possibility of receiving $1,700, I can see why someone would think twice before applying. The future of rural America depends on whether the next generation decides to continue their family farms and ranches. And instead of making assistance more accessible, we've made it more difficult and more painful. Third, a lot of that pain comes from a crippling shortage of staff and expertise. I hear over and over again that people say, I'm not blaming the people that are working at the agency. I'm not blaming, in some ways, the agency itself, but they don't have enough people, and they don't have enough expertise. Staff levels at NRCS have been going down for years, and they took a massive hit during the last administration. And while I applaud Secretary Vilsack for his heroic effort to staff up again, we still have a lot of work ahead to get the right people in place. And until we achieve that, we're going to continue to see delays in projects and people discouraged from participating at the very moment that we need everybody to scale up. And one way USDA could help fix this would be by offering salaries that are actually competitive. NRCS posted an engineering job in Durango, Colorado for $35,000 a year recently. Madam Chair, you can't hire an engineer in Durango for that, not when a typical home there costs $600,000, or the median family price is $600,000. Fourth, USDA's conservation program should do more to help producers in the West grappling with a 1,200-year drought. We got to do better, for example, by offering real incentives to conserve land in the heart of the Dust Bowl and equipping farmers and ranchers with tools to use water more efficiently. And finally, NRCS programs need to reflect actual costs in the economy. In Colorado, people tell me they've given up on EQIP projects because as they waited 2 years for USDA to process their application, the project cost doubled and the math no longer penciled out. When you put it all together, these 5 issues are a massive headwind to USDA's conservation mission, and it has real cost to America. It's the rancher who wants to do the right thing by his land but lacks the expertise or funds to make a transition. It's the rural economies that are deprived of opportunity, the topsoil that is degraded, the water that is polluted, the family farmers and ranchers forced to sell their land instead of passing it on to the next generation. They're doing everything they can, these farmers and ranchers, to pass on that legacy to their kids and to their grandkids. They deserve conservation programs at USDA as imaginative as they are, as ambitious as the problems they seek to solve, and that reflect the indispensable role of America's farmers and ranchers as stewards of our working lands and of our environment. Today, our farmers and ranchers may not face exactly the Dust Bowl, but they are facing, in my part of the country, a 1,200-year drought. They face the changing climate and a future that's going to be a lot hotter and a lot drier. They don't have time to waste. They need us to make USDA's conservation programs work and live up to their potential. And my hope is that today's hearing can help us identify specific ways to make progress, and I'm prepared to work with every member of this committee in a bipartisan way to do so. Let me stop there and turn it over to my friend, Ranking Member Marshall.
Well, thank you, Chairman Bennet. I do appreciate you holding this hearing today. Welcome, everybody. Madam Chairwoman, thank you for coming as well for a very important topic near and dear to all of our hearts. Chairman Bennet, I especially want to say thank you for your friendship and you mentoring me along over on this conservation project that we're co-chairmaning over on this side. I do appreciate your leadership. I appreciate you mentioning the drought. We got a drought map behind us. And unfortunately, this drought doesn't stop at the Kansas border. I would imagine the eastern third of Colorado looks very similar, and I look to my friend from...
It doesn't start at the Kansas border
It doesn't start, though. It goes down into New Mexico as well, and our friends from Oklahoma, probably the most drought-stricken area in the country right now. And I've never had a tougher time talking to farmers and ranchers than I am right now. The one thing I cannot do is make it rain. I'm a fifth-generation farm kid myself, and I know that how hard Kansas farmers and ranchers work daily to protect our environment and conserve precious resources. Farmers and ranchers are the original stewards of the land. They were the original environmentalists, and we all want to leave this world cleaner, healthier, and safer than we found it. I think it's incredibly important for farmers and ranchers to talk about the regenerative agriculture practices, conservation that they are already doing. In Kansas, we've not just been talking about it, but we've been walking that walk since the Dust Bowl. Our office has made it a point to promote conservation efforts within the Kansas ag community, as well as ongoing federal conservation programs taking place in Kansas, and I'm going to brag on them today. Kansans are working every day to protect our environment and conserve precious resource our ag economy needs to thrive. Kansas farmers, ranchers, growers, and producers are finding unique and practical ways to preserve our land and protect our water and air. Their efforts are worthy of everyone's praise. Some notable examples in Kansas start with one of our witnesses, Ray Flickner, and his family, who will be talking in more detail about his operation, but I can say that Ray was practicing regenerative agriculture for many decades before it became mainstream in the Kansas ag community. Next, the Browning family has utilized USDA's Great Plains Grassland Initiative to restore grassland currently dominated by woody plants. Woody plant encroachment threatens livestock productions and increases the chance of wildfires. This has been a war on our own land, on our own ranch, where I've spent hours and hours with a tractor and a mower trying to mow down cedar trees and doing fire management as well. So the brown spots here is where they try to get rid of some of the salt cedars. The salt cedars line the Arkansas River all the way to at least the border, and each one of those suck water out of that water basin. The same thing happens with Rattlesnake Creek, which flows through our land and into Quivira Wildlife Refuge. Next, we have the Randall Carr from Lyon County's focuses efforts on protecting his fifth-generation family farm. Mr. Carr has adopted several conservation practices, including cover crops to minimize soil erosion, no-till planting, and weed management, and rotational grazing with his meat goat herd to control weeds and add nutrients back into the soil. Now, before we go to the next one, I want to just point out that on our farm, we've been practicing no-till planting for over 20 years. It's nothing new. And those farmers, I'm afraid, aren't going to get rewarded for the good practices they've been doing for decades, but we're going to reward new people for doing it. So we have to make sure that's a level playing field. The same thing with the cover crops as well. We've been doing that for decades. We don't have goats, though. It's one thing that we've not got into yet. Next, one of my favorite places, Joe Carpenter, Flint Hills rancher, uses burning practices to preserve the landscape and ecosystem of the Flint Hills, the last remaining tallgrass ecosystem in the United States. For thousands of years, tribes set fire to the prairies to kill invasive species and encourage the growth of new grass, which attracted bison to the area for hunting. The need for the fires continues today. Plants, animals, and the economy still depend upon it. I was up in those Flint Hills just Saturday, and even though I got rained on and held on, I managed to catch some bass, and I'm going to be taking Ranking Member Bozeman to that same area to see some of those tall grasses, which the chairwoman has seen herself on her last visit to Manhattan, Kansas. Next, we don't have a picture, but the Milford Watershed is something I'm very proud of, working with Kansas Farm Bureau and other regional conservation partnerships through the USDA and NRCS to help ag producers act on water quality. The voluntary program works to help farmers and landowners increase the health of their land and make operations more efficient through actions including nutrient management, planting grass filters, residue and tillage management, and cover crop planting. The practices lead to a better quality in Milford Lake. Chairman, I'm not sure if you've had a problem with some of the algae. Is it blue algae, Tuck? The blue algae that releases the toxins, but Milford Reservoir it services Fort Riley, among other places. And we had a problem with blue algae, went in with a project where we planted grass filter strips along the streams that feed that, and hopefully will have an impact. Next is the Both Farm. From the Garden City Company, they took initiative to conserve water by starting water technology farms. After concerns about declining water levels in the Ogallala Aquifer in northwest Finney County due to years of drought, they established a voluntary water conservation area. Again, I got many farmers and ranchers trying to do something with voluntary water conservation. How do we reward them, similar to when we set grasslands aside? During that time, they've used only 53% of their allotment, and while the 5-year time frame of the allocation, we've had above average precipitation. They demonstrated that they could maintain yields and profitability while conserving water for future years. So this diagram would be pivots most likely of corn. We could also grow soybeans here. That's typically what we irrigate in Kansas and southwest Kansas. This would probably be corn. So there's all sorts of different pilot projects with whether you have your nozzle up this high and that water goes to the ground, you lose a lot to evaporation. So you want to get that water as close to the ground source. We're also even putting, I'm going to call it ribbons, underneath the ground for water irrigation. Very expensive, but you can also put nutrients through that, again, growing more with less. Next project, the Playa Lakes Joint Venture collaborated with USD NRCS for a groundwater recharge and sustainability project. Another huge success here to address declining aquifer levels in western Kansas, Wichita, and Greeley counties, and support the Leoti and Tribune communities. Since their project, 1,100 acres of playas near Leoti and Tribune have been restored. 375 million gallons of water is saved. Again, a project we've been working on with Ducks Unlimited long before I got to Congress. Little playas, little low water areas that are horrible at growing something, but the wildlife loves it. So we're trying to figure out how do you set aside a whole quarter of land or a whole 80 acres? How do you set aside just little playas that might be 3 acres, 5 or 10 acres? So that's going great. Yesterday, I met a dairy producer, one of my favorite stories of the day. Everyone's got to hear this one. I visited the Miller Dairy, 4 or 5 years ago outside of Hutchinson. He has maybe 130 head of Holstein cows. And what he's doing, believe it or not, landfills account for about 20% of the world's methane production. The landfills, where our city dumps are. So he has taken food waste from there, including pie crust, and he's taken candy from Russell Stover's, taking them out of those waste piles and feeding them to his cows, and they make great milk. So the pie crust on my right, and then candies from Russell Stover's, the best candy maker in all of America in Abilene, Kansas. Yes, it's the sweet milk, yeah, home of Dwight Eisenhower. Okay, efforts of these Kansans through voluntary actions and federal programs illustrates the desire farmers and ranchers have to produce resources and conserve land. With that in mind, the conservation programs in the next Farm Bill must focus on producers. It must be results-driven rather than solely practice-driven, and must be flexible enough to be useful. Thanks again to all the witnesses. Thanks for having this hearing. I'm excited to hear from them today.
I am excited to have somebody on the Agriculture Committee who's got as much firsthand experience as you do. It will make a huge difference, so thank you very much for being here, and thanks for your leadership. You will not believe this, but I have not thought about Finney County, Kansas for a long time. I wrote a high school paper about sugar beet production in Finney County during the Dust Bowl, and I haven't thought about it since then, so I got to go find it.
It's a great place to visit. Great rodeo.
Got to go back. All right, we have been joined by my great neighbor, Senator Lujan from New Mexico, who's got a witness here, I think, to introduce, and I know he's got a busy schedule, so why don't you introduce your witness from New Mexico, and then I'll go introduce the rest, except for the ones that Senator Marshall is going to introduce.
Well, Chairman Bennet, thank you very much, and Ranking Member Marshall for convening this hearing. It's always great to be with our chair and our ranking member of the full committee as well. And it really is an honor and privilege to introduce a well-respected friend, neighbor, leader, mentor in New Mexico. And that's none other than Jose Luis M. Ortiz y Muniz, to testify about the important role conservation programs play in all of our lives, of our farmers and all of our brothers and sisters that are ranchers as well. Mr. Ortiz y Muniz is an indigenous land-based native New Mexican and father from the Genisaro land grants of La Merced de Santo Tomás el Paso del Río de las Trampas. I know it's a mouthful, but when you go visit it, you will learn it. It will take your breath away. And also La Merced de San Antonio del Embudo, where he serves as vice president. He's also from the Spanish land grants of La Merced de Santa Cruz de la Cañada, where he serves as secretary, and La Merced de Santa Barbara. He lives in the village of San Antonio del Rio Embudo in the high desert of northern New Mexico. It's there where he tends to crops and cares for livestock and also stewards ancestral lands. Now, he is a water leader in his community as well. Mr. Chairman, you all understand the power and importance of acequias out in Colorado as well, where these are centuries-old earthen structures that were created by hand. And annually, we clean them with a shovel for the most part. We get in there and we keep them wide, keep about a half shovel, I think, that we take out at the bottom with the silt that comes in, 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep in some places. But it's incredible as to what our ancestors thought of with their ingenuity. We call them acequias. It's fun now that federal officials know what acequias are. So we're doing our best there, Jose Luis, and we'll continue to do better. Professionally now, he is the program director and research scientist at the Sostenga Center for Sustainable Food, Agriculture, and Environment at Northern New Mexico College, and is the community liaison for the Green Roots Institute. At the Institute, he works to help coordinate the development of grassroots community-driven process to determine and implement environmentally, economically, and culturally sustainable plans rooted in water, food, and economic security for the future of New Mexico's culture. And so I want to say welcome, Jose Luis. It's good to have you. And Mr. Chairman, while I know I was here to introduce, I also want to commend the conversation that both of you opened up this hearing on, and the importance of these programs like NRCS at USDA and the frustration that's felt by all. I hear about it when I'm at the grocery store or when I was cleaning ditches this last couple of weeks. Folks will pull over because they'll see me in the field, and they come by to chat. And they share with you their frustrations of what's going on. And then also, Madam Chair, you know, and the ranking member know, I've always advocated for smaller land producers as well. Back home, I'm only on about 4.5 acres. A lot of the folks that Jose Luis is helping are on a few acres. Much of it is for self-sustenance. Some of it, it's the family's budget. And so I just want to say thank you for what you're doing and letting me work with you on those issues. And thanks for letting me introduce Jose Luis. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lujan, and thanks for bringing your perspective as well. It's really, really valuable, and we're glad you made the trip to do this introduction. And I think we've been joined by the ranking member, Senator Bozeman from Arkansas. Thank you for coming to this important hearing. Thank you for your leadership. There's a witness from Arkansas. If you'd like to introduce Mr. Rutledge,
There is.
I'd be happy to have you do that.
Thank you all. It's great to be with the chairwoman. And again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Marshall, for convening this very, very important hearing. And I think everyone on the committee understands how important the conservation programs are. And one of the people that we're very proud of in Arkansas, he and his family, is Mr. Jeff Rutledge. He's a fifth-generation farmer from near Newport, Arkansas. He and his wife, Amy, produce rice, soybeans, and corn along the White River and Cache Rivers. Jeff returned to his family farm after earning his bachelor's degree in plant science from Arkansas State University and a master's in agronomy from the University of Arkansas. He covered both bases. That's always a good thing. Jeff currently serves as one of the inaugural members of the USA Rice Ducks Unlimited Rice Stewardship Partnership Committee and various other committees and boards. And again, we're very, very proud of Jeff and his family. And thank you for taking the time and the effort to be here. And thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you, Senator Bozeman. And with that, I'm going to introduce a couple witnesses from Colorado, and then Senator Marshall will introduce his witness, and we'll get started. So I first have the great privilege to introduce Paul Bruchet to the committee. Paul is the fifth generation of the Bruchet family to farm and ranch in Colorado. He operates the family ranch near Kremling with his brothers and father. Paul is currently spearheading a restoration project through the Regional Conservation Partnership Program on the Colorado River with 12 landowners to sustain agriculture and the health of the river. Paul was recently appointed to represent the main stem of the Colorado River at the state level for the Colorado Water Conservation Board. He sits on the board of directors for the Colorado Water Trust and serves on the Grand County Open Lands, River, and Trails Advisory Committee. I visited with Paul to see his and his neighbors' important work through this program. It was also a pleasure to have Paul as my guest at the State of the Union this year. Paul, thank you for being here, and I look forward to your testimony. Dr. Sarah Porterfield also is here from Colorado. She is the Western Water Policy Advisor for Trout Unlimited. Her work connects federal policies and programs with Trout Unlimited's on-the-ground projects throughout the American West to improve aquatic habitat and ensure that both communities and the environment thrive. She holds a PhD in history from the University of Colorado Boulder, where her work focused on the Colorado River Basin. And I'm grateful to have her here today with us at this hearing. Sarah, I look forward to your testimony. With that, let me turn it over to Senator Marshall for his introduction.
All right, Chairman, I'm excited to introduce another fifth-generation farmer from Mound Ridge, Kansas, Ray Flickner, and his son Ryan is here today. I want to recognize Ryan. Ryan, think about this. That means your great-great-great-grandfather was homesteading land in Kansas about the same time mine was, and over that story is repeated. Ray is a graduate of the ever-fighting Kansas State Wildcats, the nation's first land-grant college. If you don't believe me, there's a little painting over on the Capitol on the far south side of the building that commemorates that Kansas State University being the first land-grant college. You can't take that away from us ever. Then Ray went on and got a master's degree in education. He's taught various ag-related courses at different Kansas colleges, including Bethel, Heston, Salina, Votech. During the 1980s, Ray began work in ag finance and banking, first with the Federal Land Bank during the peak of the farm crisis. We all remember that. Then he worked for the U.S. Ag Bank before transitioning to commercial ag finance in the 1990s and 2000s. That diverse background not only allowed Ray to observe multi-generational family farms from a family legacy perspective, but also taught him that production agriculture must be sustainable, both in terms of financial strength and natural resource conservation. Ray owns and operates Flickner Farm and created the Flickner Innovation Farm Project, a partnership between his farm, university research, and industry leaders to identify and test a multitude of conservation practices in an on-farm setting. Ray served on the Groundwater Management District Board of Directors, also a member of the Kansas Water Authority. Currently, Ray is an acting member of the Little Ark Watershed Restoration and Protection Strategies Stakeholder Leadership Team. His work has been recognized statewide. The Flickner Farms received a Success Story Award at 2022 Kansas Governor's Water Conference and the 2021 State Natural Resources Award from the Kansas Farm Bureau, and was a finalist in 2021 and 2022 for the coveted Leopold Conservation Award, and received Kansas Banker Association Award for both soil and water conservation. Ray, welcome. You bring a vast wealth of experience, and we can't wait to hear your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Marshall. And as Chairman Stabenow had a word,
I wanted, thank you.
Kansas word.
Yes, I had a Kansas word because, Senator Marshall, when you said Kansas State, I'm thinking Pat Roberts, and I just have to tell you, today is Senator Pat Roberts' birthday, so if you're watching, Senator Roberts, happy birthday. I was at the Sweet 16 where Kansas State beat us in overtime at Michigan State. We were texting back and forth, and I won't tell you what Pat said when we won, but let's just say he loves Kansas State. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will say what Pat Roberts once said to me. We were having a fight over taxes of some kind, and I was probably wrong. He was probably right. And he said to me, "Be careful, young man. Some people in my state might want to drive to be able to afford to drive to Colorado to buy your free marijuana." And he was not the one wanting to drive there to do that. And I said, "Mr. Chairman, it's not free; it's legal." But that was Pat Roberts.
That's right.
Paul, why don't you get us started? We'd love to hear your testimony. on that note.
Chairman Bennet, Ranking Member Marshall, Madam Chairwoman, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Paul Bruchet, and I am proudly the 5th generation of the Bruchet family to farm and ranch in Colorado. Our family ranch, Reeder Creek Ranch, is about 5 miles east of Kremling on the headwaters of the Colorado River. We run a traditional cow-calf operation. We also run a fly fishing business. In 2022, I was appointed by Governor Polis to be the director of the Main Stem Colorado River, representing the Colorado Water Conservation Board, a role I am very active with today. Starting in 2002, the headwaters of the Colorado River suffered from low snowpack and runoff. Drought conditions took over the landscape. Faced with the same situation in 2003, we recognized the severity of the problems. Our ability to irrigate and operate a successful agriculture business was in jeopardy. At that time, we decided to get involved and make improvements to our ranch to adapt to the changing environment. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program has been instrumental in surviving the last 23 years of ongoing drought. The Headwaters RCPP, known as the Colorado River Headwaters Project, has three main projects directly impacting 30 miles of the Colorado River. The Colorado River Connectivity Channel, reconnecting the Colorado River around a small reservoir funded by the Watershed Act, PL 566 under RCPP. The Habitat Restoration Project addresses critical habitat for 15 miles below the connectivity channel. And the Irrigators of the Lands in the Vicinity of Kremling, or ILVK project, addressing 12 more miles of the Colorado River and 1.5 miles of the Blue River for 12 different landowners. This project focuses on irrigation infrastructure and river health so that sustainable ag production continues in the face of Colorado River water scarcity. The Colorado River Headwaters Project is a shining example of partnership and adaptation for the state of Colorado. With Trout Unlimited as the lead partner, it includes ag, municipal interests, conservation organizations, local, state, federal government agencies, all working together to address river health and ag productivity. The key partners from this project have also worked together on a water conservation project, helping the state to understand high elevation use of ag water and other key data to help inform policy decisions. It is now working on an alternative forages project to help producers in water-scarce areas and to potentially rethink how water conservation projects or programs can and will impact food and fiber production. Existing conservation programs in the Farm Bill can do more to assist producers if they promote innovative practices that are driving a more sustainable future. In January of 2019, my family signed a contract with the NRCS under EQIP RCPP. This project had multiple goals. It is the second largest ag diversion ditch in Grand County with a right to divert up to 65 cubic feet per second from the Colorado River to 5 separate producers. The diversion structure and headgate are on my family's ranch, and we have the largest water rate. The project was developed to replace the existing diversion structure and headgate, including a fish screen on the headgate to prevent fish going into the ditch. The RCPP agreed that projects that were built in the river were outsourced to our river engineer or outsourced technical assistance. On-farm projects from the headgate down ditch were to be designed by the NRCS or NRCS technical assistance. For the diversion structure, outsourced technical assistance, we had a design by July 2019, just 7 months after contracting. We were finished with construction by October 8th, 2019, less than a calendar year from contracting. As far as the NRCS technical assistance, the first draft of design that I saw was produced on October 25th, 2021. This is 2 years and 9 months after contracting. This delay is a good example of NRCS capacity struggles. I would suggest that we evaluate a better approach. Does it make more sense for NRCS to increase capacity with additional staff, or is the NRCS better situated to outsource design work? The NRCS has some great folks doing great work. Our state conservationist, Clint Evans, and our former state conservation engineer, John Andrews, are champions, and they deserve a lot of recognition for getting projects on the ground in Colorado. They need additional capacity, and they need additional flexibility. The opportunities created by the Farm Bill and Conservation Title helped to save my community at the headwaters of the Colorado River, and I'm very grateful for the opportunities that exist. Processes and fundamentals can be improved to streamline process to get projects on the ground quickly. Administrative burdens, NRCS staffing issues, technical assistance capacity, and a lack of flexibility in programs and contracts have created challenges for getting work done on the ground. This necessary help has yielded enormous benefits, and the partnership involved is a model for how the Farm Bill can advance resiliency for ag and the environment. My brothers and I all have young children. We want them to be the 6th generation of agriculture in Colorado. My hope is that there are continued conservation programs that focus on innovation and can adapt to a changing world. Right now is our opportunity to create solutions for future generations. And with that, I conclude my testimony. Thank you, Chairman Bennet.
very much for your testimony. And now, Mr. Flickner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Bennet and Ranking Member Marshall, Chairwoman Stabenow, and Ranking Member Bozeman, it's a privilege and an honor to provide testimony on conservation and agriculture today. As we celebrate the Earth Day this week, I believe it's important to recognize that the multitude of natural resources we've been blessed with, and that the efforts and farmers and ranchers make to care for their land. My name is Ray Flickner, and I am a fifth generation to farm land west of Mound Ridge, Kansas. Ever since my wife Susan and I purchased our first tract of land in 1980, we've held a steadfast belief that we will leave our land in better shape, better condition than when we found it. Today we own and operate land in 4 different counties in Kansas, most of which have vastly different rainfall patterns, topography, and underlying soil health conditions. In McPherson County, where the headquarters are, we are blessed to have a portion of the High Plains Aquifer a mere 60 feet below the soil surface. Using this resource, my father developed the second oldest water right in the township back in 1955 to irrigate row crops and to raise catfish. I am proud to say that we are still pumping irrigation water out of the same well casing that he installed in 1955. On our home farm, I have seen firsthand how conservation programs and practices can contribute to a more sustainable and resilient farming operation. Water use is a big part of that. In the past 20 years, I have converted more than 600 acres of flood-irrigated farmland to an efficient subsurface drip irrigation system and retrofitted a center pivot with precision mobile drip irrigation, as the ranking member Marshall had addressed previously. According to the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Water Resources, implementing these conversions has allowed me to use 40% less water than what the county average use is. I have used the expertise of NRCS, FCA, RAPS, Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, and others, not only for cost share, but for important technical assistance to improve the natural resource management of the operation. With technical assistance, we've rehabilitated a 70-year-old windbreak and constructed new shelter belts. We created better working habitat along creek banks and acreages that were not able to be used for row crop production. EQIP has allowed me to construct terraces to improve my irrigation systems and to purchase soil moisture probes that help improve my water use management. CSP helped me create a pollinator habitat on fields that were too difficult to farm. And CRP has proved beneficial for protecting highly erodible land. While I appreciate these opportunities to protect my land's natural resources, improvements can and should be made on how USDA supports conservation-minded farmers. I cannot tell you the number of times I have visited my local USDA service center, applied for a program, filled out the paperwork, only to be told that I don't qualify. In fact, for 3 years now, I've applied for an EQIP cost share to plant cover crops and still have not been accepted. The exorbitant time and requirements and costs associated with designing and building and complying with these programs often has made implementing the practices also too costly. For example, one of my tracts is a CRP contract that requires a prescribed burn. The amount of money spent to have that single burn completed several years ago was almost as much as what the total 10-year payments on the CRP contract amounted to. Needless to say, I don't plan on re-enrolling that CRP. I believe most producers can tell similar stories. They want conservation on their land, and they are implementing best practices that greatly benefit the public good. We know that building terraces, grassed waterways, and where practical, implementing cover crops greatly reduces soil erosion. We know that converting irrigation delivery systems to a more efficient technologies helps prolong the lifetime of our groundwater aquifers. Thankfully, there are local, state, and federal cost share programs to implement these activities. I do argue, however, much more can and should be done. Evolving technologies help deliver, such as aerial imagery and plant-based sensors, help deliver real-time data on natural resource health, but are not considered to be eligible practices by NRCS. Similarly, if Congress chooses to move the CRP in direction of a working lands program rather than a land retirement program by allowing additional haying and grazing opportunities, or even allowing CRP to be fenced and grazed, these changes will go a long ways in sustaining our nation's grasslands, soil, wildlife, water, and ultimately the American producer's bottom line. I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share some thoughts from a fifth-generation agriculturalist from Kansas about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And I stand ready to answer any questions that the committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flickner, for your very useful testimony. And now we'll turn to Mr. Ortiz y Muniz for your 5 minutes. Thank you for being here.
Thank you to the Honorable Michael Bennet and Roger Marshall for holding this important hearing and for inviting me to share my story and bring the young farmer perspective to this conversation. My name is Jose Luis, and I'm an indigenous, land-based, native New Mexican from 4 federally patented land grants in northern New Mexico. I am a father, a mayordomo, a professor, a National Young Farmer Coalition Water Fellow, and a community liaison. I live in northern New Mexico with my family, where I grow vegetables and raise livestock. Just as my grandfather stood in front of Congress many years ago, I stand in front of you from generations of farmers to share a vision for a future of agriculture in my community and for future generations. For me, the pathway out of opiate addiction was a return to my agricultural roots and to reconnect to my ancestral lands. And had it not been for a farmer training program championed by organic farmer Don Bustos and hosted at Los Jardines Institute in Albuquerque, I likely would have found myself in jail, homeless, or even dead. The way to authentically prepare for an uncertain future is to equitably resource the next generation of farmers. My vision for an equitable farm bill is conservation programs that focus on ecosystem health, community infrastructure and expertise, land access, and cultural competency. When I returned home, I lacked the tools, resources, and land access that would support a viable return to farming. These challenges inspired Don and I to revitalize the land-based learning center at Northern New Mexico College called Sostenga, where I am a farm director and a research scientist. We run a demonstration farm that teaches farmers and feeds students. Also, I'm a mayordomo for my acequia serving 120 water right owners, managing the distribution of our sacred water resource, as well as the maintenance of our 4 miles of acequia infrastructure. Acequias are ancient irrigation canals dug by my ancestors hundreds, even thousands of years ago. Acequias are also democratic community self-governance systems, deeply rooted in principles that guide our community's ability to thrive in an environment that would otherwise be impossible. So much has changed in recent years due to the unpredictable effects of climate change. What once was a thriving Embudo River has now transformed into a creek because of persistent drought. On the other hand, extreme flooding and wildfires like the Calf Canyon Hermit's Peak fire have caused catastrophic damage to our acequias, and a year later, we are still just picking up the pieces. We dread a future where acequias could become a footnote in history. Protecting our systems, our acequias, and our traditional life ways, truly an American cultural capital is crucial. We need more federal investments in acequias and land grant systems and recovery programs like the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. As a community leader, I work closely with farmers, providing training and technical assistance and helping with NRCS and FSA applications and program implementation. If I don't support farmers in my community, who will? One of the biggest barriers my community faces is understanding the application's complexity, which results in sentiments that these programs are not meant for them. This is not unique to just my community. According to a 2022 survey by the National Young Farmers Coalition, nearly 3/4 of young farmers do not know that there are USDA programs to assist them. The unpaid work I do fills the gaps in the NRCS program delivery. The role of a farmer should be to grow food, not to fill out paperwork. The NRCS should improve programs and uptake through culturally competent technical assistance paired with equitable outreach, harnessing peer-to-peer farmer networks and community-based organizations. This could look like hiring and compensating people from the surrounding and direct community who understand local community needs, providing the support I provide, serving as true agency resource for farmers. A recent survey from the American Farmland Trust found that more than half of respondents get their technical assistance and education directly from farmers, compared to 20% from the NRCS. They need to look to partners, technical service providers, and peer-to-peer opportunities for assistance. Through our coalition, producers have identified two key barriers to accessing EQIP funding: farm size and difficult applications. Research has shown that large farms are more likely to receive payments than small farms because NRCS usually prioritizes projects based on acreage. NRCS should create a small farm version of EQIP, one that can help meet the needs of small farms and help young farmers access funding more easily through a simplified process. By investing in young, small, and farmers of color, USDA can make long-term conservation and resilience a reality for the next generation of farmers. Thank you all for listening to my story, and thank you all for your support.
Thank you very much for your testimony and traveling from New Mexico to be here, Mr. Ortiz y Muniz. We really appreciate it. Mr. Rutledge, you're next for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Morning, Chairman Bennet, Ranking Member Marshall, Chairwoman Stabenow, and Ranking Member Bozeman, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this hearing and this opportunity to testify. My name is Jeff Rutledge. I'm a fifth-generation rice, corn, and soybean family farmer with my wife Amy in Newport, Arkansas. I'm also actively involved in two organizations that are leaders in the conservation arena, USA Rice and Ducks Unlimited. As a farmer, I'm proud to live, sustainably manage, and earn my living from land at the nexus of production agriculture and conservation. In addition to the rice and the other crops that I produce, we are proud to provide critical habitat to hundreds of species of wildlife, particularly migratory waterfowl, namely ducks. Rice fields throughout the U.S. rice-growing regions not only provide $3.5 billion in migratory waterfowl habitat, but also contribute to substantial biodiversity, raising crawfish in the South and salmon in California. Farm Bill conservation programs are important to the rice industry, and most important is that they are voluntary, incentive-based, and follow a locally led model, which is critical to widespread adoption by rice farmers. Conservation programs should have the dual goal of not only incentivizing environmentally beneficial practices, but also helping producers transition to conservation systems that promote productivity and economic viability as compatible goals while supporting the rural economy. Working lands programs like EQIP and CSP serve as economic drivers. It takes more than just one farmer to complete the work needed to implement an EQIP or CSP contract, including outside technicians, engineers, and local soil and water conservation districts needed to help oversee the conservation planning, as well as the scientists, land movers, and other equipment necessary to implement those conservation practices. Nationwide, and in Arkansas specifically, the demand for EQIP and CSP has outpaced funding by about 3 to 1, resulting in significant unmet demand for both programs. As you write the 2023 Farm Bill, Congress should prioritize working lands programs like EQIP and CSP. EQIP is a vital tool for us because it is straightforward with an extensive list of practices that work for all regions and all production systems. EQIP's broad suite of structural and management practices can help better manage water resources, help with irrigation efficiency, reduce soil erosion, improve soil health, and enhance water quality. CSP helps target specific resources using several complementary practices and has been a great tool for rice farmers to help pay for more expensive long-term management practices and increase conservation work across the entire farm. Congress should ensure CSP continues to acknowledge early adopters while also incentivizing incremental conservation goals through programs. Many rice farmers are struggling to find options within the program that reflect the advancements in technology and workable systems to improve soil health. We encourage Congress to work within the Farm Bill to ensure the program is offering appropriate options. However, Congress should be careful not to prioritize one natural resource concern over others. For example, the rice industry, working with USDA, has made significant investments in conserving the flyways. An essential piece of that strategy is winter flooding, which should be recognized for the many benefits it provides. Winter flooding is an EQIP and CSP wildlife practice that provides moist soil wetlands in rice fields and attracts significant numbers of ducks in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley and the Central Valley and coastal California regions. Furthermore, Congress should not prioritize one solution over others. Because rice's unique cropping system and 100% irrigated crop, conservation programs should not provide one-size-fits-all solutions. For instance, focusing solely on practices like cover cropping that most rice farmers cannot utilize would be inequitable for rice farmers. That's why solutions should be locally led and support local priorities. I must also mention the importance of RCPP. As you know, the rice industry's symbiotic relationship with waterfowl led to a historic partnership with Ducks Unlimited and called the Rice Stewardship Partnership, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. While we both have separate missions and methods, we have managed to collaborate and develop goals for our partnership, including work on RCPP. The Rice Stewardship Partnership's RCPP projects have pulled together nearly 100 diverse partners and has had phenomenal success in delivering on-the-ground conservation to rice farmers. Since the creation of RCPP in the 2014 Farm Bill, the RSP has impacted over 800,000 acres of rice and rice rotation ground and provided over $108 million in additional conservation funding. For the 2023 Farm Bill, USA Rice and DU would like to note the complexity plaguing RCPP since the 2018 Farm Bill is affecting long-term viability of a crucial partnership program to rice farmers. Congress should work to address administrative barriers for partners through thoughtful and minimal solutions. Rice farmers are passionate conservationists. They invest in their own financial resources to bring those Farm Bill conservation programs to their farm. However, none of these historic producer investments in conservation can happen if the farm is not profitable. I urge Congress to ensure all producers have the safety net to ensure to continue to be sustainable both economically as well as environmentally. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. It's very good to have you with us today. And Dr. Porterfield, you have the last word until the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Bennet, Ranking Member Marshall, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify today on behalf of Trout Unlimited, or TU. My name is Dr. Sarah Porterfield, and I am the Western Water Policy Advisor for TU. Today, I speak from TU's experience as a partner with farmers and ranchers throughout the country on projects implemented under conservation title programs. With agricultural producers on the front lines of the climate crisis, these programs, in conjunction with programs eligible for IRA Climate Smart funding, have never been more important. In the West, climate change is manifesting as deep and long-standing drought. Across the region, the 23-year drought has wreaked ecological havoc and forced producers to make difficult choices in the face of severe water scarcity. However, current conservation title programs are not yet fulfilling their true potential because they are too often mired in bureaucratic inertia. To meet the immediate needs of producers, the next Farm Bill must include legislative clarifications or changes directed at improving program delivery. The Farm Bill is, after all, for farmers, and without a healthy environment, we won't have the robust agricultural economy and culture integral to this country. It should be noted that current practices like cover crops, crop switching, and prescribed grazing remain essential for protecting agricultural economies and incentivizing producers to experiment with actions that will help adapt to water-scarce conditions of the future. But they are not enough by themselves to respond to the real-time challenges that producers are grappling with at scale in the West. To meaningfully move that dial, 5 specific actions should be considered as follows. One overarching issue that affects agencies' program delivery is insufficient field staff to meet producer demand. This lack of capacity prevents good ideas from coming to fruition and inhibits producers from implementing needed changes to their operations to adapt to climate change. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP's purpose, is to better coordinate NRCS activities with partners like TU to expand and add value to on-farm and regional conservation work. However, RCPP is widely viewed as fraught with red tape that makes it difficult for partners and producers to get funding to the ground effectively. TU is currently experiencing these burdens with its Gunnison River RCPP, awarded in September 2021 and not yet under contract more than 18 months later. Such delays not only keep producers waiting for the planned benefits to their operations, but also prevent realization of drought resilience benefits. In contrast, contracting for a Conservation Innovation Grant project awarded to TU in the same geography soon after the RCPP took only 3 months to execute, and the project is now well underway. The next Farm Bill must reduce RCPP's administrative burden by modernizing federal contracting authority and streamlining the application, contracting, and reporting process. The Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations, or WFPO, or PL 566 program has been a valuable tool for states and local organizations in addressing watershed issues. The Colorado River Connectivity Channel, a WFPO project, is the linchpin to connecting a fully functioning stream channel around Windy Gap Reservoir while building drought resilience in the Colorado River headwaters. This project illustrates two common implementation barriers: major delays in approving the required watershed plan and the requirement to monetize environmental benefits. These issues threaten to delay construction, significantly increase costs, threaten vital match funds, and nearly derailed the project. Improvements to the WFPO program in the next Farm Bill can be accomplished by streamlining program administration and prioritizing projects that provide multiple benefits to watershed health, rural communities, and producers. Historically, Western irrigation infrastructure shared among producers did not qualify for EQIP funding, which meant small to mid-sized water management organizations like acequias or ditch companies were ineligible. The 2018 Farm Bill authorized these kinds of organizations as eligible entities for implementing practices that provide fish and wildlife or drought-related benefits. While this provision was designed to aid Western producers, it does not change or detract from the EQIP funding available to farmers in other parts of the country. Implementation of this provision has been slow and lacked guidance. The next Farm Bill should require NRCS to publish a suite of practices that can address increasingly scarce water supplies while meeting environmental sideboards and ensuring funding eligibility for the often overlooked and disadvantaged small to mid-sized organizations. Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or CREP projects, provide an annual rental rate and other incentives to producers who participate voluntarily, retire environmentally sensitive land, and plant appropriate vegetative cover. Recently, CREP has demonstrated success in helping producers on the Great Plains and in the West respond to climate change and drought by decreasing groundwater use. To optimize these CREP's success, the next Farm Bill must increase the land rental rates to be on par with the rates paid for irrigated lands. In addition, allowing agricultural land to have some production value, even if not irrigated, may be critical to creating the economic resilience needed to maintain viable agricultural activities consistent with CREP conservation purposes while incentivizing retirement of sensitive, unproductive lands. TU appreciates the attention given by this committee to conservation title programs and Western water issues, and I thank you again for the opportunity to testify today.
I want to thank the witnesses for your testimony. It is sort of remarkable, I think, to have the kind of breadth of perspectives that we've had this morning, the breadth of geography that you represent in our country, and also the commonalities that have been expressed all the way along. So thank you. I look forward to our conversation. Madam Chair, would you like to get us started?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much. Wonderful witnesses. Thank you to all of you and your leadership on the committee, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and always wonderful to be with Senator Bozeman, my partner on the full committee. When I think about it, and earlier, Mr. Chairman, you were talking about the Dust Bowl. My mom grew up in Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl. She lived in western Oklahoma, picked cotton on a farm. Her whole family grew what they ate and what they wore and so on. And so hearing her stories just has reaffirmed for me how critically it is important that we have these conservation programs and that we make sure that they work, because all of our farmers have an important job to do, growing food, fiber, fuel for our planet, and while at the same time protecting our air and our water and our land. So thank you for that. And I have to say, from the water standpoint, nothing is more important in Michigan than protecting our water. Protecting the Great Lakes is in our DNA. And so we have a little different situation than the West when we're talking about things. It's not droughts. We have to watch for flooding. We have to watch for other issues. But we certainly all have a great commitment to what we need to do together and continue to allow our farmers to do together. And that's why the conservation tools are so very important. For us, it's about keeping our water clean and improving resiliency of the land, providing habitat for wildlife, and We do know, and Mr. Flickner, you mentioned that EQIP weren't able to get in. We've heard today it's oversubscribed 3-1. That's been true, absolutely. And the good news is now that we have the resources. So step one is we now have additional resources for voluntary conservation programs that farmers want. So now we just have to make sure that they work well, which is, I'm hearing loudly and clearly, I hear it from Michigan, I understand the deep concern about that. We have these critical new investments, but EQIP and RCPP, which I authored in 2014 Farm Bill, and have been excited about the structure, but very frustrated with what is happening now. We thought we made changes in 2018 to make it work better with less bureaucracy, and obviously we didn't. We have a lot of work to do together to make that work better. We have to make sure these resources are effectively used and that we're supporting our farmers to be able to do that. And too much paperwork, too long of a wait on projects just isn't going to do it. So I am very committed, Mr. Chairman, to working with all of you on this. So a couple of questions. Mr. Boucher, let me ask you, in your testimony, you described challenges with NRCS implementation, again, of RCPP, and the long delays with award announcements and actual contracting, and that these delays have led to projects missing local deadlines, which is a great concern when I hear you say that, and cost estimates escalating and so on. So could you talk a little bit more about your recommendations for what we should be doing to streamline the program?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. So I can see this in two different ways. NRCS, with their technical assistance program, we knew going into this in our RCPP that in our region, their engineering staff was down and they were backlogged. And so this head gate, and with a fish screen on a ditch of that size, relatively innovative, it would have been the largest one in Grand County, a complex project. And I think that it's either we have to get the right engineering staff in to move things forward and build that capacity, or make recommendations from NRCS that this be outsourced. And I look at what we did, because we had already had experience working in river with outsourced engineering. That was the direction that we went, and all of that was smooth. And so it's kind of that decision time for NRCS, is this better outsourced to move on, or is it possible to build that capacity internally, knowing that especially with engineering staff, they just don't have capacity.
Thank you. And let me also stress, I am a strong supporter of the NRCS in general, and know that they have been severely understaffed. And we've talked at the full committee about the lack of technology. Senator Bozeman and I have talked about the folks using paperwork here instead of computers, and all of the challenges that we have to help fix here in terms of with resources and so on. But and there's wonderful projects going on in Michigan right now, but there's just more that we can do to make this work even better. Dr. Porterfield, conservation practices are often described as a win-win for farmers. They are a win-win. I think they're a win-win-win, actually, for farmers, for the environment, for people in our country. You touched on the economic benefits that conservation programs bring to rural and farming communities. Could you highlight some of the economic benefits and speak on the repercussions if we fail to invest in conservation?
Yes, of course. I'm not an economist, but I will do my best on this. I want to give you a project example, or a number of project examples, from the Henry's Fork drainage in Wyoming. This is a drainage that's a tributary to the Green River in the southwestern corner of Wyoming, and drains the north slope of Utah's Uinta Mountains. And we have a fantastic project manager down there, and she started building relationships with producers in that drainage. And she started by working with one rancher on upgrading one irrigation diversion. He used to have to go out, as is quite common, and put up a push-up dam once, twice, 3 times a year, depending on how the hydrology went. And so by helping him to install an upgraded irrigation diversion, she helped him save a great amount of time and money from going out there and having to fix that dam every year, potentially multiple times. And from there, this producer has gotten folks in the valley on board. We've seen these irrigation diversion upgrades upgrades go in throughout the drainage, saving those producers time and money and their labor costs. And I think, too, when we think about economic repercussions, if we don't have a healthy environment, we don't have an agricultural economy. And these things go hand in hand. So taking care of the environment is essential to taking care of agricultural economies.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Ortiz, welcome. We so appreciate your being here. You underscore the important role community leaders play in building an agricultural community and connecting young and beginning farmers, so very important, with important resources. I very much appreciate your story and the leadership you talked about as a volunteer helping others and providing information. Thank you for doing that. Can you talk a little bit more about how NRCS can better connect with communities like yours to help our farmers? We know that we have important work to do with small farmers as well as large farmers, and so many. I'm excited about the things happening in urban areas and small farms, and I think it's such an opportunity in so many ways to create jobs and access to healthy food and the right conservation practices continuing and so on. But how can our NRCS better connect with the farmers you work with to implement conservation practices on the ground?
Great, and thank you so much, Madam Senator. What a great question. I'll say that in the farming community, and I'm sure my colleagues here can agree, the farming community is about as diverse as the variety of vegetables and livestock and crops that we grow. Every farm is different. Every farm has its own story, its own roots, its own language, its own practice. I think one way that the NRCS can support farmers, beginning farmers, just farmers in general, is by providing culturally competent outreach, culturally competent technical assistance. I think what that might look like, and I talked about it a bit in my testimony, is sourcing their staff from the local community so that as staff are doing their outreach work and identifying what are the specific needs of individual farmers, they already have a jump on understanding the cultural elements, the environmental elements that farmers are facing, whether their community is one that grows rice and flood irrigates, or is an acequia community, is an indigenous tribal community, is one that is grows on great acreage, one that grows on 2 acres. The cultural competency piece, I think, is one of the most important elements because, as my colleague so greatly explained, it's not a one-size-fits-all type of solution. We really need solutions that are flexible and are knowledgeable of the community's even historical experience so that when a farmer receives the technical assistance, it is already tailored to the challenges that they are already facing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and we'll go to Ranking Member Bozeman next. Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Welch, would you like to go? We know you've got a busy schedule.
There's nothing more important than the Agriculture Committee.
That's true. That is a fact. Is there anything left to be said? I don't think.
Well,
I think you've said it all.
But I'll ask a few questions. We got some smart people here. What you were just saying, Mr. Moniz, this is the dilemma, because the folks in Vermont have frustrations dealing with the paperwork. There's also a challenge with the personnel, having people on the ground. And there's 2 things here. One is, it is immensely beneficial if there can be flexibility. And number 2, there's hell to pay when the flexibility leads to no accountability. And those of us who want flexibility have to acknowledge the need for accountability. And I'd be interested in some reactions to how we can achieve both of those. In many ways, the ideal from my perspective would be that we have a performance-based goal, and then the accountability is, did you meet the goals, as opposed to micromanaging. And when there's micromanaging, it presumes something that doesn't exist, and that's sufficient staffing for there to be a quick turnaround. So how do we deal with that tension? And I'll start with you, Mr. Moniz, and because go ahead, and then we'll go to you. Yeah.
I think there's several ways. I think that, as my colleague on the end of the table here said, is outsourcing some of the work that can be done, working with community-based organizations, contractors. That's a way, I think, to alleviate the accountability from the NRCS's end. And I think at the end of the day...
Let's stop there for a second. Be specific as to how that would work. I mean, that's a general statement, but in order to get to a place where there really is flexibility, who in your case would that be?
Okay, so first of all, I think stepping out of the office, the agricultural community has a lot of great leaders. I know that's the case in every community. Meeting with those leaders, understanding whom they are. In my community, an example is my mentor, Don Bustos. Talking to him, building a relationship with him, picking his brain, and then applying.
Finding local competent leaders.
Local leaders, local community organizations, local businesses and contractors, identifying those individuals and championing them and working with them.
All right. Mr. Boucher, you want to do it, and then we'll go to you, Ms. Porterfield, or Dr. Porterfield, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Welch. So for me, it is the local, but the way that the system is already set up, we need to empower our state conservationists. Clint Evans is very aware of what's happening in Colorado. He's very aware of the geographical diversity of the different ag diversity. And the amount of times since our RCPP was awarded in 2016 that I've heard the comment that it has to go back to Washington or it has to go back to the national RCPP team. If we empower our local champions, they understand what our needs are and how to get work done. And I think that allows for that flexibility also with the accountability.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Porterfield?
Yeah, I think that we have a really good example in conservation title programs already of one that works very flexibly and is quite successful, and that's the Conservation Innovation Grant Program. We have one on the ground now, as I mentioned, in the Gunnison Basin in Colorado, and that has proved that the flexibility available with a grant agreement like that allows contracting to happen faster. As I said, it took 3 months to get under contract instead of another one in the same geography. We're waiting more than 18 months now to get under contract. It eliminates the layers of contracting that have to take place so that TU as a partner can contract directly with those producers to help work for exactly what you're talking about, which is those outcomes rather than getting lost in the specific practices and exactly how they have to play out.
So you've actually had good success with that?
Yeah, we're seeing it right now. The Conservation Innovation Grant right now in the Gunnison is looking at how to both expand what's called a low-rod network. It's a radio network for all sorts of different kinds of soil moisture sensors, et cetera, different input, combined with what our field staff calls the auto tarp, which is a remote-controlled check structure on ditches.
Right.
And it's going really well out there. Yeah.
Mr. Rutledge? I mean, things are different for like rice farming than what Dr. Porterfield's talking about.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
And that's correct. And as I mentioned in my testimony, we've had very good success in the RCPP project, implementing those conservation practices with our rice stewardship partnership with USA Rice and DU, bringing together over 100 partners to do that, and having USA Rice and having staff available to oversee that and implement those conservation programs has frankly worked very well for us. As I mentioned, the success of it. I do think there needs to be some tweaks, maybe administratively in the burdensome application process.
Do you have some specifics? Because we can't micromanage. We write the legislation, but obviously the hard work is the implementation, and it's implementation at the bureaucratic level. And a lot of the folks who are in these ag programs with the government, they really care about good outcomes.
Yes.
And obviously the farmers do, and the conservationists do. So the more specific you are as to what those tweaks should be, I think the more beneficial it would be to the chairman and for us to be able to get something that's going to be useful. So if you have that, get it back to us. I'd be interested. Mr. Flickner, do you want to add anything here? Last word?
Well, that's not good when I have the last word, but the state of Kansas, we have and I'm not sure, all I can speak is what I know about Kansas, but we've had a little discussion about the boots on the ground and staffing and limitations there. We've had some real challenges at the state level relative to leadership and maintaining somebody in that position. It's been, kind of a turntable and so forth. And also my experience at the local county level, it's been very hard to keep employees there. Case in point, I have an EQIP agreement on moisture sensors that we're using to evaluate the irrigation usage. Started off, and I submitted, I think, a stack of paper about this thick for support of what we had done from a moisture sensor installment standpoint, which included, they wanted weekly crop reports from the Crop Scout. There was a tremendous amount of detail, kind of the micromanagement type of approach. Submitted that, then went in and visited with the mid-level because, actually that individual took a job in another county, left. We weren't totally complete with that processing. Went to the mid-management level and found out that probably about 3/4 of what we submitted really didn't need to be submitted. And I think that's more of an educational standpoint from the local individual knowing what the requirements are.
That's actually helpful because I think, while we're talking about the frustration, we here can legislate the program, hopefully come up with some money, but the implementation is really going to require a partnership, and the local leadership really matters, both with the state folks, and they've got to be all behind this. And if, that person that you mentioned is no longer in the job and is moving around, that's not something we're going to be able to handle here. So there's got to be, that local leadership that provides that key for implementation. But thank you. Go ahead. I'm out of time, so I'll yield back to.
Thank you, Senator Welch. Thank you very much for those questions. And Senator Bozeman, our ranking member, please. Please go ahead, and just for the attention of our members, a vote has been called, so Senator Marshall and I will split up the duties here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you for holding the hearing, and thanks to the panel. I think this has really been a very, very good session. It's interesting that the IRA dollars, there's $38 billion there that's kind of set to the side. It's not in the Farm Bill. It's restricted to climate change and carbon. And as I was listening to the testimony, and the testimony is so good about the problems that you're going through right now, river health, water, fish, water conservation again, ecosystem health, climate mitigation, growing food, and not paperwork, all of those kind of issues. Small farm equip, and I do agree that we have a problem there. That small farmers, it's a lot easier to get a lot of money than it is a little bit. So we need to work on those things. Improve soil health. The list goes on and on. Insufficiency of field staff. Again, that's what we're hearing today, and those things are so very important. So what we've got to do is figure out how we can capture those dollars. I don't hear you asking for a lot of equipment that is measuring the amount of carbon that you produce so you can turn that into the government. And especially as you complain about the field work, the lack of staff in the field, and then also just the paperwork that you already have to do, period. So one of my concerns is we do have potential access to a significant amount of money. We've got to figure out how to do that in a logical way. And then the other thing is I'm very concerned about tying our programs, whether it's risk management or it's the conservation programs, to you being climate friendly enough, to get it, okay? And I think that's a real risk. It's not a one-size-fits-all. You and your particular areas know best. That needs to be monitored. It needs to be looked at as dollars are pushed out. But that's something I'd really like for you to think about. Again, that's a real concern that I have, and it truly is a threat. Mr. Rutledge and Mr. Flickner, you all mentioned the importance of risk management. Tell us, we've talked about a lot of the things that are kind of the basis of farmers being able to go forward. Tell us how that's valuable. Crop insurance, ARC, PLC, the risk management tools. Mr. Flickner.
Well, by all means, I do not want to belittle or talk down. Crop insurance is a very major element of risk management in a multi-million-dollar operation where we're running the kind of dollars we are. Part of that, I guess, comes from my lending background that I spent, 35 years in the business. This business is very capital intensive. And then when you deal with the weather, climate issues and so forth, one bad year from a small farmer standpoint may be the final year because you don't have the wherewithal. So, definitely, we need to maintain some type of a safety net for the industry, for us to continue to produce the food, fiber, and fuel that we do.
So you got to have the risk management in order to go forward and do the conservation things.
Exactly.
It's also very important.
Exactly.
And Mr. Rutledge, do you agree with that, or?
Yes, sir. It's, as Mr. Flickner mentioned, this is a very capital-intensive endeavor, and we put everything on the line every year to go out and produce the food, fiber, and fuel that feeds the world, not just this country. And so we have everything that we own at risk every year to do this. And we're trying to do it as sustainably and as conservation-minded as we can, because those natural resources are where we earn our living from. So we're going to take better care of them than anybody will. But we can't do that if we're not in business.
Right. Mr. Rutledge, and I think I'll kind of throw this open to the panel, but you can start. As I mentioned earlier and talked about, the concern about the IRA restricted conservation dollars to only climate and carbon practices rather than letting local resource concerns be met. And there's room for both. Can you talk more about why Congress should avoid prioritizing one natural resource concern over others or one solution over others?
Yes, sir, because as has been mentioned here, there are a myriad of natural resource concerns, as many as there are farms. And the practices don't fit everywhere. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to what works best and what best protects our natural resources on any individual farm. Even within one individual farm, mine in particular, I have areas of my farm that I do plant cover crops on, and they work very well. I have other areas where I do a lot of rice production and heavier ground that is not feasible to plant a cover crop. So we do winter flooding, and that protects our soil over the winter just like a cover crop does.
Anybody else? Paul?
Thank you, Senator Bozeman. I would just add that a lot of times in agriculture, it feels like people are telling us how we should operate our business, but we have to remember that so much of what we do in food production is driven by the consumer market. And so when we're thinking through these things and what sorts of changes or how policy comes to shape, it really is driven by the consumer. Thank you.
Right.
Senator, relative to the carbon situation, and I think naturally most times when we, at least in our area, when we deal with carbon, we think about cover crops and those type of things. As you know, being in Kansas, we are, the eastern part of the state can get plenty of rain. The western part of the state is almost a desert. Case in point, I have a property in western Kansas, probably about 60 miles from Garden City, that last year the corn never set an ear, and the grain sorghum, which is kind of the old standard out in that territory, never set ahead. It was so dry. Needless to say that a cover crop that uses the moisture, and I'm experiencing that right now with my McPherson County property, in the fact that what I do have cover crops on has depleted the topsoil moisture to the point where planting soybeans, which would be my cash crop, is going to be a real challenge unless we get a rainfall event. And so I think we've got to understand, when we talk about covers, and the credit and the carbon credit, from a big picture standpoint. I have not signed up for any of the carbon credit programs, largely because there's not a standardization as to what that looks like in terms of, what are we capturing. I do have some studies with the university going on to try to evaluate that, but you end up with the Wild West, is what I call it, in that arena right now.
Mr. Muniz, can you jump in real quick, or the chairman's going to yell at me? I'm over my time, but
All right,
I
I'll make
really am, as a small farmer, I really am interested in.
Thank you, Senator. I think one way is to look at the Agricultural Resilience Act. The National Young Farmers Coalition endorses this, and it talks about 6 key pillars that I think will address the myriad of natural resource issues. It's increasing research, improving soil health, protecting existing farmland and supporting farm viability, supporting pasture-based livestock systems, boosting investments in on-farm energy initiatives, and reducing food waste.
Very good. That sounds like 6 great pillars. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good list. We've been joined by Senator Klobuchar from Minnesota. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Senator Bozeman, for being here this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Bozeman. I was thinking that you have a lot of ducks in Arkansas with Ducks Unlimited. We have pheasants forever in Minnesota, and I've always been a big fan of some of the conservation provisions in the Farm Bill and how we've been able to work all of this out with your leadership, Senator Stabenow, and of course the great Senator Bennet. So thank you for that. Mr. Flickner, information on the economic environmental benefits of soil health is still not quite there. Senator Thune and I introduced legislation to improve the use of conservation data analysis. As I listen to you talk about how important it is, can you talk about the importance of having that information that compares yield rates to rates of cover crop and no-till adoption or other conservation practices, how that could be helpful?
Senator, we have been experimenting with the university on several studies relative to cover crop usage and the economic returns and so forth. And again, my experience has been, because of the dry climate we have, typically what I have seen is there is a economic drag with the use of cover crops, largely because we're using moisture, subsurface moisture, that we may need for a cover, for a eventual cash crop. But I also want to admit that, there are more things, as I addressed in my testimony, my intent is to leave the farm a better place than what it was when I found it. I don't want to belittle my forefathers when they came over in 1870s and used the mold bore plow to plow the prairie, because if they hadn't done that, they would not have survived. But we do know that, extensive tillage can have some dramatic effects. So there's two ways you look at that. One is the true economic return, and that's been a real struggle for the territory we're in. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that, leaving the soil in a better condition than what we found it, if we can increase organic matter, if we can absorb more rainfall when the rain does occur, and it will rain in Kansas one of these days, that there are some real benefits to that. So I think that's the challenge that we have is from a producer standpoint. You got to be viable, profitable from an economic standpoint.
Understand.
But on the other hand, there are things that we need to do to leave the ground in a legacy form.
And I think that's part of Senator Thune and I also, given that our states are somewhat similar when it comes to ag, introduced the CRP Improvement Act to have cost share improvements, as you know, opportunities for grazing infrastructure, an increase in the CRP annual amount, the limitations, and state acres for wildlife enhancement. We've also looked at disincentives, so that for native sod to cropland, and we have provisions of that bill that have already been signed into law. So I agree with you, it's a balance, but we want to create those incentives. One area that I think would be helpful, and you've kind of referenced this, is using technology to as best we can, and that's this precision ag, which a lot of us are into. And Senator Fisher and I actually have a bill on low interest rates to farmers for investments in precision ag. Could you talk about how that would be helpful to get more precision ag and make it more affordable?
Well, we do know that, the industry, life in general, is moving very rapidly. There's a lot of new technology. Case in point that I've experienced, 22 years ago, we installed our first subsurface drip irrigation system, which technology was developed in Israel. Mm-hmm. One of the first ones, I believe, I think I was the first two in the county to do that. There were some issues with that. I'd ended up with a bunch of problems with it because of an install that was done correctly. It's upside down and some things like that. But it was interesting. After I did that, a year later is when cost share became available for that. Mm-hmm. The challenge you have being an early adopter and doing some of this technology, you get out too far ahead of the curve. You don't end up having the ability to have some assistance in that arena.
Right, technical assistance. Would be helpful.
Financial assistance.
You're just such a pioneer, Mr. Footner.
Well,
but what you're saying is that you're never going to get wide-scale adoption without the technical assistance.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I just want to change to another topic, and that's you, Mr. Rutledge. The U of M, University of Minnesota. We're in, Michigan territory. Is there another U of M? No, there's really only one Golden Gopher University. Is on the cutting edge of developing new crops and hybrids that are hardy for harsh winters, resilient to changing climate, and resulting in efficient and productive yields. We all know Norman Borlaug studied at the University of Minnesota, even though he's from Iowa. Many of the crops, like Kernza, will have an immediate impact on farmers' ability to support conservation efforts like reducing soil erosion, improving water quality. Could you speak to the role that research is playing in the development of innovative production and conservation practices?
Well, thank you, Senator. Yes, I think that's the goal of land-grant universities, is to continue to do research to make us more efficient, more productive, and better stewards of the resources that we're given to oversee. Mm-hmm. So yes, the funding those land-grant universities and the agricultural research is of utmost importance for the industry as a whole and for our country and for food security.
Thank you. Mr. Ortiz-Muniz, the voluntary conservation programs like EQIP are especially popular with young farmers, yet I've heard in my state them voicing concern that they have a lack of information about whether it's cost share or other things, and makes it even harder when they're brand new at the job. What steps does Congress need to make these programs more accessible to young farmers and ranchers?
Thank you so much, Senator Klobuchar. Appreciate the question. I think there's a myriad of steps that Congress can make to provide access to small farmers, new farmers, to programs such as EQIP and whatnot. I think one of the ways, and we've talked a little bit about that, is looking at supporting the organizations, the contractors who are already doing this work, so that they can help to fill the gap that NRCS and EQIP are unable to complete with, whether it's staff shortages or just not having the cultural competency piece in their own office. I had mentioned to Senator Welch, and the technical assistance in conservation planning is a really critical tool and a first step in evaluating a producer's resource needs. I think that Congress should direct USDA to reserve a portion of conservation technical assistance funds for the pilot program to increase the capital of NRCS and other local service providers to better assist small acreage producers in developing conservation plans and applying for EQIP financial assistance.
Very good. Well, I want to thank all of you. My state's actually in the top 5 when it comes to enrollment in these conservation programs, and we've always seen the benefit of them and how important it is. Not only we have a lot of hunting and fishing in our state, but we also have, I used to have some great statistic on how much money we spend on worms, but I'm not going to go there today. But we also have really, really thriving ag community. So I thank you all for seeing that important part of the Farm Bill, and thank the chair, there he is, for having this hearing today. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. We appreciate your comments, and indeed, I've enjoyed some of the agriculture up in your state as well, and indeed, soybeans and corn, a lot of the same crops.
Yes, I think we met the first time when you were in the House, right? You were there up with Colin Peterson.
Yeah,
and,
trying to figure out what sugar beets were all
yeah,
about.
exactly.
Exactly.
All right.
Well,
Very
thank you
good.
again, and I got a couple questions for our witnesses. I'll start with Mr. Flickner. Mr. Flickner, like you, our family farm was more in the eastern third of the state with more of a climate like where you live. And the farm I live on now is more like 150 miles west of there. Couldn't be different. The rainfall, the soil. When we talk about cover crops, where do cover crops not work well? And what would you recommend for a better conservation practice, or what have you found useful? You're in 4 counties as well, so I think that's why it's a great question for you.
Senator, if I had the answer to that one, I wouldn't be here. I was like,
okay.
No, again, as I addressed earlier, my experience with cover crop, it is very reliant on the moisture that you get. Now realize 3 of the 4 farms we have are not irrigated. They're truly western Kansas. The McPherson County property is irrigated, but I do not use irrigated water for cover crops because of the fact that you have a certain allocation of water you use and have made a management decision that you're going to use the water for your cash crop and not for cover crop. Now, one of the things that I have done and have been reasonably pleased with has been that I've been introduced wheat, winter wheat, into the rotation, and I guess in the true sense of the term, they tell me that that's really not a cover crop, because what I do is I plant corn, harvest the corn in the fall, plant wheat then in the corn stubble, take the wheat then to harvest, and then plant soybeans after the wheat.
Okay.
So we have a growing crop the entire time there. That has worked reasonably well if we get sufficient moisture. Been very pleased with that one. As I said earlier, the cover crops that I'm experiencing this year, we're holding off on soybean planting, largely because the cover has depleted what little bit of moisture we did have. Don't have a seed bed to get the soybeans growing, though as we've looked at the long-term forecast, it looks like maybe we're going to get some rain next week, and so maybe we'll get that problem solved. So, the eastern third of the state of Kansas, I think typically you get rainfall in the spring that you can do that.
Okay.
You go to the western 2/3, not so much so.
Okay,
And
all
that's
right.
our dilemma.
Thank you. And my next question is for Mr. Rutledge. I want to talk a little bit about your experience with DU. Certainly, I've said once or twice here that farmers and ranchers were the original environmentalists, but right behind them have been the hunter and the fishermen and women as well. And certainly it's a group that puts their money where their mouth is, and the Pittman-Roberts is a great example of some of those funding. Of all the wildlife conservation groups, DU has certainly been a shining beacon across the nation, and from Kansas to Arkansas to Minnesota and places in between. Very proud of what the work I personally have done with DU as well. I mentioned earlier their impact on the playas. I just think that the DU emphasis on habitat development has had a huge impact on conservation and preservation. Can you just dive a little bit deeper, some of your favorite DU projects? I know you've mentioned them broadly, but just tell me exactly what they do. Paint that picture for me.
Thanks, Senator. Yeah, I think I guess their best project that I'm most proud of, I think, not because I'm involved, but is the RCPP partnership that we have with them. DU came to the industry, recognized the symbiotic relationship there between rice and ducks, and the habitat that we provide during the winter flyway, in the flyways. And so they've been very instrumental in that partnership, bringing millions of dollars in conservation funding to the rice production area that provides that winter waterfowl habitat that we do just as a natural means of producing our crop.
So make sure I get this right. This is why DU is one of my wife's and my favorite charities of choice, is that they leverage government money with DU monies, with local monies, and then oftentimes they'll bring even local workers and hands-on, and may bring in a bulldozer or a tractor and use everybody's efforts to do a project.
And that's been the great thing about this partnership, is that it has truly been a partnership. And as you mentioned, leveraging those federal dollars, that's the great thing about these conservation programs. They are cost share, so we are putting our own money where our mouth is, as DU is, as Rice is, as the farmer is, and using those federal dollars to improve our conservation efforts.
Great. I'll go back to Mr. Flickner again. Sometimes you can't find money for good conservation practices, but yet you have a history of doing those practices anyway. Tell me more from the heart, why do you invest money in these conservation practices even though it doesn't pencil out as an agribusiness person?
Senator, it's because of my desire to leave the farm or the ground that we own in a better shape than what I found it at. You know, trying to be a good steward of what the Lord has provided us, and you know, pass it on to future generations. So, you know, a lot of times what I've done with that one is I've not accepted or not pursued cost share to do that, but I did the work myself, which, you know, normally is a little bit cheaper in the long run, can be, to do that. So, you know, again, it comes back to the desire to, you know, leave it in much better shape than what we found it.
Great. And I think that's, you know, true for every farmer and rancher I've got to know, is that you don't get rich farming, but you certainly, what you leave your children is that inheritance, is the land itself, the opportunity to grow your own groceries. Just great times. I'll start back with you, Ray, and I may ask some other folks as well. Let's talk about the lack of efficiencies that go on with USDA and FSA and NRCS. Just be as specific as possible. You know, if you were king, what do you wish USDA was doing more efficiently? And this is my chance to speak to staff. I'll think of some. Here's a simple example. We had a huge fire in the western part of Kansas. Not only did we lose thousands of cattle, but we lost thousands of miles of fence. And the NRSC officer simply could not get out there to do that inspection before or after. That was a big holdup. You know, why can't we have a drone go out and do a video? Why can't the farmer rancher do a video and send that in to the person? They're simply, it's not like we're going to drive across town and walk 10 miles of fence line to document that we put these fence posts in at exactly 39 inches of depth and there's 5 strands. Why can't we just document that and send it in? So, Ray, do you have some common sense advice that we could do that would be more practical?
Well, I think the key, Senator, on that one is, you know, this is a people business. You know, we're all dealing with people, and you know, as I addressed a little earlier, you know, the staff turnover has been a struggle that I've seen in the state, from the state level down to the local level. Training new people, trying to get them up to speed as to what's going on. So, you know, I think we've got to figure out how to get people there that have the background, that understand. I've been fortunate to have some mid-management people that understand my operation and will call me and let me know, you know, about different things that are available. Without them, I probably couldn't keep up with what all the activities are there. So again, I think, you know, we've got to figure out how to get the people with the right resources there. And
I think that's a good point. I think sometimes the people at NRSC and FSA feel like we're beating them up, and that's not been my experience at all. I got an email yesterday from my FSA officer about something on our farm. So I do appreciate the work they do. But somehow we got to empower them more and more as the populations decrease in these rural counties, and you have one NRSC officer for suddenly 3 counties, and these counties aren't 10 miles across. These counties are 60 and 90 miles across as well. So what technology we can use? Maybe Paul, what about you, Mr. Boucher? Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. So my experience with this has gone 2 different directions. We had a field fit that was authorized via telephone and FaceTime from the field with an engineering blender. Those relationships matter so much. The engineer knew myself, knew our contractor, we had worked on it, and we were able to field fit it based on some technology that worked out fantastically. But that was based on relationship and having trust between one another. So that local authority and having different field offices be able to represent and champion those sorts of decisions, because those are the folks that know the people on the ground.
Yeah, the FaceTime is a great simple way to do some of the inspections, it would seem to me. And eventually you've got a sign that you've done the work anyway. And if we come back 3 years later and say, we're here for a different inspection and we see X, Y, or Z, you're still accountable. I think Senator Welch had a great point about accountability as well as efficiency. Yep. Mr. Ortiz-Munez, any other comments about efficiencies, what we can do, how we can do it, our job better? You mentioned some earlier, I understand.
Yeah, thank you so much, Senator. Appreciate you. You know, you had posed the question if you could choose or if you were at the helm, I would say looking at supporting more peer-to-peer programming. Farmers teaching farmers is a great tool. We often see that in New Mexico. For us, Small Farm Equip. And I know that we're sort of different in northern New Mexico than the rest of the nation. Back to the diversity of farmers. New Mexico has a NRCS small acreage initiative. I think modeling that is a great opportunity to look at the smaller producer out there. Again, back to the Agricultural Resiliency Act. And then, programs that could really support farming families, passing on the tradition to the next generation so that it is actually sustainable. Keeping farmland is so important. I'm seeing in just my short life in the last 10 years, the amount of farmland that is not being used and then that is being developed for small ranch houses that aren't being farmed I think poses a huge risk not only for our environment but for our great tradition that is agriculture in this wonderful nation.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the peer-to-peer opportunities. Seldom do a round table and I don't learn something. We had some senior citizens and we were talking about Medicare Advantage, and the best education wasn't from the government. It was the seniors who had been through the process before say, well, we met this roadblock and we did this, so I appreciate that. Maybe I'll close with Dr. Porterfield. Any other efficiencies in your line?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. 2 specific recommendations, I think, to help NRCS capacity issues, which is wrapped up in efficiencies, of course. One is that the certification, there's a certification process for individuals, private businesses, NGOs, et cetera, to become TSPs or technical service providers. But there's a disincentive to that because there's a cap on the rate that those TSPs are allowed to charge. And it's from what I understand, far below market rate. So there isn't an incentive for individuals, for a private engineering firm to get certified as a TSP because they can't charge enough money to make it worthwhile. So changing those caps can help other folks complete or add to the capacity of NRCS. And then second, again, to go back to the contracting piece, I pointed out in my testimony that changing the RCPP contracting agreement from a partnership agreement to a grant agreement will really help partners like DU, as you spoke to, and TU and many other NGOs acting as partners, get that technical assistance to producers and help improve that capacity and get those benefits to the ground more quickly.
I appreciate those comments, and I might ask my staff or the committee staff, the TSP, is that the same type of technical help we need with some of the carbon bill we did earlier in the year that we're trying to get people certified on giving the carbon credits for agriculture? It's 2 different. Okay. So I would like some follow-up on that, and because it's the same problem, maybe two different programs. So I want to say thank you again. I do need to run to another committee. We're running back and forth and voting. That's the way it happens on Thursday. So thank you to everybody for being here.
Thank you so much, Senator Marshall, for your leadership here, for participating, and we'll see you later. Appreciate it. Just on the TSP point at the end, Dr. Porterfield, this was not what I was going to ask about, but I walked in on it. I mean, could you just say a little bit more about why the current proposal or the current situation limits the capacity that might be out there, and how lifting those caps or changing those requirements would add to capacity, especially in places. I mean, a lot of these projects obviously are in rural, by definition, in rural parts of America where it can be hard to find. It can be hard to keep up with the cost of living in some respects and other kinds of things. Ironically, in some ways, but can you go ahead and talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. And I'm more than happy to get you more information on this after the hearing, too. But I think that what Mr. Boucher spoke to and the difference in time for engineering is a piece of this as well between private engineers and NRCS engineers. So, allowing, from my understanding and speaking with our field staff who are on the ground working with these programs and with producers every day, is that, if there are an increased number of TSPs available, that helps with things like engineering bottlenecks, right? You have more people available to work on the engineering work, for example, that needs to get done. But with that disincentive, with under below market rates that they can charge, there isn't an incentive for there to be that additional capacity from other businesses and non-NRCS.
And could you also talk, and I'm going to come to Mr. Boucher and ask him about this. You also said in your response to this question that you thought that it might make some sense to adjust the RCP program so that it were more of a grant program. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that, about why that might help?
Yeah, I think to contrast RCPP, our two Gunnison projects are a perfect example. The Gunnison RCPP was awarded in September 2021, and it's not yet under contract. We're waiting on a supplemental agreement for technical assistance right now. And if that doesn't get done in the next couple of months, we might have to push our construction season another year to fall of 2024 instead of 2023. We were originally planning fall of 2022. So this is, at this point, an 18-month contracting process, and it's not finished yet. By contrast, the Conservation Innovation Grant that contracting process was done in 3 months because there isn't this kind of layer cake of contracting that has to happen under a grant agreement. So it expedites getting that money out onto the ground rather than getting stuck in this loop of getting contracts done and going to review at the national office, et cetera.
And Mr. Boucher, do you have a view on that as well?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Bennet. So when I think of this, our RCPP, Trout Unlimited is the lead partner. And when a producer would go to contract with the NRCS, unless that producer shares their contract specifics with the lead partner, Trout Unlimited, sometimes even as a lead partner, they're not even aware of what's happening financially until it comes back through reporting from the NRCS. So there's this, there's this data gap that ends up occurring when, as a lead partner, I would think that they would want to know real time how that is happening and why it's happening. And I think I want to stress in that too within a program of a grant. Without Trout Unlimited, without American Rivers acting as conservation partners for our ag work, it would not be possible. And I would state that it's very likely that my family and many of our neighbors would not be around producing anymore based on the significance of this project. But the amount of time and strain that has put on those organizations, if there was a grant program that allowed also for some staff time for these organizations to be able to participate with us as partners in this, because I think no matter how much we tighten what a program can look like, when it is a large-scale regional conservation partnership program, it's a big project. That is a way to fill that capacity, perhaps, without it relying exclusively on NRCS staff.
Thank you. I have one more question for you, Dr. Porterfield, and then I'll go to the other witnesses. I mean, as you know, and I know you're familiar with the droughts that we're facing in Colorado and Kansas, and as you noted in your testimony, the last Farm Bill had multiple provisions to help producers, some of which I worked on, and water managers, to cope with a water scarcity, but USDA has never fully implemented many of these provisions. For example, an authority under the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, the CREP program, Senator Marshall and I introduced a bill just earlier today. We can do two things at once. We can be here and introduce a bill together to improve this program. And I would just ask, which specific programs could USDA implement today that would be helpful in the context of this drought that we're facing? What more can the agency do to help protect water resources that are critical to fish habitat and to agriculture?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I think that the one of which I spoke to in my testimony, which is the water management entity provision, or under EQIP, that allows for the small to mid-sized organizations, multi-producer irrigation infrastructure to be eligible for EQIP funding, right? This gets to the organizations like canal companies, ditch companies, acequias, land-grant Mercedes, that are under this provision eligible for EQIP funding to work on, do upgrades to that multi-producer irrigation infrastructure. And with that, under the 2018 Farm Bill, there are provisions that those projects will benefit, will have drought resilience benefits and environmental fish and wildlife habitat benefits. So I think implementing that, the rollout for that has been very slow and very unclear, but that's one certainly that could be implemented now.
Thank you. And to Mr. Flickner and Mr. Rutledge, you both have testified about your firsthand experience with conservation programs that have both benefited the environment and your bottom line. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit before you go now about the greatest successes that you've seen and maybe the greatest challenge you've seen. What could we do what can we fix to actually make it more likely that you're going to have success in the future, be able to hold on to that farm or that ranch for the next generation of Americans? I should have called on somebody first, but you fight it out. We'll see what happens.
Well, Senator, I guess probably my greatest success, and the one that has got me to this point, has been the fact that, like I said, 22 years ago, we started with this Israeli-based subsurface irrigation system and the resulting efficiencies. I am blessed in our area, though we're part of the High Plains, not the Ogallala. I do have a reasonably good recharge ability in the aquifer, and they say that if we can cut our water consumption in the aquifer by 10 to 15%, that we would be sustainable and actually may go back to where we were 15, 20 years ago. We're down about 15 feet in the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. But we don't have a real depth of saturation either, so we've got to watch that. So, so that, conversion there, and they now say that the county, McPherson County, has more subsurface drip than any other county in the state of Kansas. So we were early on and proved to be something that, was very beneficial and I think moving the water conservation in the right direction. So I think that was probably my greatest success up to this point. The challenges always have been, and I addressed a little bit before, the challenge you have is if you're an early adapter, you're doing some things out there that probably should be done from a conservation standpoint, and then you go in there and to NRCS and want to sign up for a program. It's not what you've done, it's what you're going to do. You have to implement a new practice. And there's a joke going around the community that some of my neighbors are saying, well, we'll go out and get our mobile plow out and go plow our no-till ground so that we can end up with the carbon payment type of a situation.
Right.
I think that whole challenge as to where we're going and how we're going to get there in terms of a funding and staffing standpoint has to be the number one frustration.
And Mr. Ortiz, I'm going to come to you and ask you the same question after Mr. Rutledge. Go ahead. Successes and obstacles?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest success, really a lot of the conservation programs have worked very well. RCPP in particular with our partnership with DU. And I think that has, as Dr. Porterfield said, I think a lot of those issues that have been there in that program can be addressed administratively, or just removing some of those bureaucratic layers, and instead of the wholesale grant, changing it to that. I think it can be fixed with smaller changes than that. So the CSP program was very successful for us, very helpful as producers, incentivizing people to put in new conservation practices, but also rewarding producers for doing conservation practices that may cost money to implement. And for instance, after the 2014 Farm Bill, the CSP program in my county alone had over 100,000 acres enrolled and brought in $15 million to the county. That's a big economic boost to the rural economy. After the 2018 Farm Bill, since that time, we now have, our contracts are now around 9,000 acres and $1 million. So that's the gutting that the CSP program took in our area anyway. So
thank you. Mr. Ortiz Muniz.
Thank you, Senator Bennet. I would say that in northern New Mexico, over the last 50 years, we've seen so much culture loss, fallow land, issues with water and wildfire. But I'd have to say that I'm blessed that in the last 10 years, I've been had the honor to participate in a agricultural sort of revolution that's happening in New Mexico. I think that the work that Don Bustos has done to bring farmer training to our community, identifying the great opportunity that we have having farmland, having an agricultural tradition, that legacy, having access to surface water and the infrastructure to deliver that to the farm, really just takes a little bit of learning to jump into a career that can be very fruitful. 10 years ago, there was 1/10 of the amount of farms that there is now just in the South Valley of Albuquerque alone. In northern New Mexico, I've seen, when 10 years ago we were 90% fallow land, we've seen a rise where now we're about 70%. Being a part of that and being able to teach and educate and bring this conversation to this stage is a great honor for us. We believe that being able to take our traditional and indigenous agricultural practices that are regenerative at its core, couple that with biodynamic and organic agriculture and identify what works is, I think, the future. And being able to, as a young person, look back at the legacy of my grandfather and 10 generations or more of farming in my community, and seeing our community struggle to maintain that, but also to see the incredible value of what it is my colleagues are doing and where our country, where our world is headed. I think that's part of my greatest success in life, is to have leaned towards our land-based ways of living and knowing as the pathway for me for the rest of my life.
And while I have you here representing young farmers in New Mexico and across the country, if you were thinking about what are a couple of changes you'd want to see, either doesn't have to necessarily be in the Farm Bill programs, but a couple of changes you'd see on behalf of small farmers to make sure that they can become the next, in the case of people that haven't yet farmed, become the beginning of another 6 generations, or can become the 7th or the 8th generation. What are a couple of things you'd say are barriers that we'd like to work on getting rid of?
Yeah, I think that having programs or even just the application process tailored to the small farm producer, making it easy for us to apply, streamlining those processes would be incredibly helpful. I think any program that allows us access to land, many small farmers are leasing land, borrowing land. Having access to land ownership or a pathway to land ownership, I think could be very powerful. And again, the peer-to-peer piece on small farming is incredibly huge. I mean, we tie one or two farmers in northern New Mexico that created this incredible change, and that is a peer-to-peer example that should be really modeled to help take us into the future.
I mean, I really do think that is a way, if you look in the past, that's the way that we've made the most progress in American agriculture, is one farmer starts experimenting, starts to look at, maybe making some change, and then others start to look over the fence and say, what are you doing? And, maybe this is something we should be doing. And I agree strongly with the view that people have expressed today, that one-size-fits-all approaches when it comes to American agriculture doesn't make a lot of sense. We are living at a moment when climate change is bearing down on us, when drought is bearing down on us, at least in our part of the country, and I think it is going to be really, really important to make sure that that we are together putting American agriculture in a position to innovate and to be able to measure and to decide, to really be able to see, as Mr. Flickner was talking about, whether or not we're really improving soil health, or was it just an idea that somebody had somewhere? Because if you can get to a place where people are really persuaded that we can measure it, I think that's a place where we're going to see producers all over this country grab a hold of what they can do in their region around issues of soil health, which are just going to, I think, that's going to be answering that question is going to be so vital for the next generation of Americans and the generation that's coming after that. So I'm going to let you all go with one final question, which is, if you had one thing, and it doesn't have to be about the conservation programs, although that would be great since that's this subcommittee, but if there's one thing you wanted the Agriculture Committee to know going into this farm bill on behalf of the farmers and ranchers that are in your communities, what is the one thing you'd want this committee to know? And why don't we start, Mr. Rutledge, how about with you, and then we'll go to Dr. Porterfield and come back around.
Thank you, Senator. I think the one thing that I've mentioned earlier, I think the safety net is very important for farmers. It's a risky business, capital-intensive business, and if we're not in business, then we're not producing food, we're not conserving resources, we're not implementing those practices, and we're not passing it on to the next generation in a better condition than we got it.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Porterfield.
Thank you. Yes, we have discussed this ad nauseum today, but I really think it's streamlining the bureaucracy, making the portal easier to use, making the application process easier, the contracting processes, anything that can get this money on the ground where it needs to be used and put to work, that'll help us.
Mr. Boucher.
Thank you, Senator Bennet.
Thank you.
The takeaway would be that we love to grow food and we love to take care of the soil. Our regional NRCS office currently has 2 staff members. When not very long ago, they had up to 8. So if we're going to get projects on the ground that are going to have the kind of meaning to withstand adapting to a modern climate, it's time to gear up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Flickner, can you?
Senator, I'm going to hedge on that one. I'm going to tell you there's 2 very important components of the farm.
That's fine. You can
one,
say if there are 3 or 4.
One is the risk management. There is no doubt, as we've talked about before, as Mr. Rutledge has addressed there, the capital requirements in the business are very large, which have implications for young and beginning farmers too. How do they enter into that deal with the cost associated? So the safety net is a very key deal. But also, the conservation side, how do we conserve our natural resources so that they're here today and tomorrow is also just as important.
Mr. Ortiz and Muniz, you get the, or E. Muniz, you get the last word.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to, express again gratitude to this body for giving all of us the opportunity to speak today and to bring our stories to this stage. For me, I think I would like to see an authentic and deep, committed investment into young, beginning, small, traditional, indigenous, land-based farmers of color by the USDA, by our government, by our nation as a whole, to stand behind our work to save our planet.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you for your testimony. I'd like to thank you for suffering the inconvenience of traveling here to Washington to help inform the subcommittee and the broader committee as we approach another farm bill. One of the great things about this committee is that it really is not a very partisan committee. We don't have big partisan disagreements among Democrats and Republicans. We do have regional disagreements, which one would expect because we have different, where we have no water, Arkansas has a ton. I happen to know, although they do pronounce the word Arkansas the way we pronounce it in Colorado, which is different from how they pronounce it in Kansas, not surprisingly, but with emphasis on the Kansas. But it is, I do think, hearing the disparate voices from people from different regions in the country that are facing different things and being able to get your suggestions firsthand about what we can do to make things better for people, and that is our intent, even though sometimes it doesn't seem like it. That is what we're trying to do. And I think it's one thing to do your own listening sessions in your own state. You hear a lot. I certainly have learned a tremendous amount over the last decade from our producers in Colorado, and tried to bring their voices here. Being able to bring, competing perspectives is also very, very helpful. But I do think we were able, and you were able, to tease out some issues and some challenges that are entirely consistent with what I've heard, and the listening sessions I've had, one after another after another. And my hope is that we're going to get to a point where, by the time the next farm bill rolls around, we'll be having a different discussion because we will have addressed some of the issues that you raised today. So I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you to my ranking member, Senator Marshall, for his partnership, both on the CREP bill that we just introduced today and for his partnership in this hearing. And I would say to my fellow members of the committee, we'd ask that any additional statements or questions you may have for the record be submitted to the committee clerk 5 business days from today, or 5 p.m. next Thursday, April 27th, 23. And this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.